You're
I
not
have a few
tempted
things.
to
No,
become invisible?
no, I think it actually can. Well, it can help some people in some ways, and it can cause problems in other ways. But I think the names you choose actually do affect you. I mean, we could get into this in the when you're ready to record or
All
whatever.
right, I'll introduce and then you can just pick up if you
Okay.
like. So
Yeah.
anyway, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Rogue Insider podcast. We've been doing a lot of readings recently, so I'm very happy to be moving back into doing some interviews. And I'm especially happy to introduce a friend of mine, Ari Freeman, who is writing a book at the moment, uh, which I will allow him to explain. So anyway, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing, Victor?
Yeah, very good. So just immediately before this, we were talking about invisibility versus legibility on the internet, using our real names versus using anonymized accounts and that kind of thing. And you were starting to get into the flow of it. So we stopped and did the
Okay.
introduction. So,
So I wouldn't just say the internet. I'd say all of my life is important because so I'm writing a book. I'm a musician, fairly well known around Canterbury. I play in a band called Rhomboid. I play as blues professor. I guess there's an alias, but it's a one-man band. Uh, and I'm a public wizard. So this is where it's not just about internet. I've been the apprentice of the Wizard of New Zealand, and moving on into being his deputy, and that's been happening since I think just before I think it was December 2013 or something. So quite a few years of public wizardry. And one thing we're talking about, you asked me if I wanted to use an alias or my own name. As much as possible, I try and use my own name. And I guess it's just that thing about keeping honesty. So the book I'm writing is called Pragmatic Magical Thinking, and I'm trying to explain how magic works to modern people who've been raised with a kind of rationalist, reductionist schooling,
it's
have
quite a
been told,
dense task that you've set
yeah,
yourself.
yeah, absolutely. I'm
Yeah.
trying to explain using no woo exactly how they can't possibly get away from magic, how we do magic and relate to magic every day, and contrary to popular belief in our modernist era, which I believe might be slowly coming to an end now. Rather than magic being this sort of crazy thing that stupid, superstitious people did in the past, I rather think that we are living in the most magical age of all of human history. We're just basically bullshitting ourselves about it, and this is why we're getting tied up in so many worms and so many knots and this sort of thing.
So we have listeners across 19 different countries. So
Okay.
just for our international listeners, I will
Yeah,
say
sure.
that the Wizard of Christchurch is a extremely long-running institution in New
Mm.
Zealand. Yeah. So your apprenticeship, if that's what you would call it,
So he's
under
been,
his tutelage. Yeah.
that's right. So he's been here since 1974
Yeah.
in Christchurch. He
That's right.
was made in the 80s, he was made the Wizard of Christchurch by the City Council, recognized as such. In 1990, he was recognized as the Wizard of New Zealand by Mike Moore, the Prime Minister at the time. And I might get this wrong, but I think 2004, he was awarded the Queen's Service Medal for
Fantastic.
services to wizardry,
Yeah.
which is the absolute first. And
Right.
yeah, so
So
no,
for people for whom credentialism and the rubber stamp of authority, for those people for whom that matters, be
yeah,
aware that what we're dealing with here is something that is operates in that realm as well as all of the magical stuff. But anyway,
correct.
why don't you give us your argument and perspective about what you see as important about magic, why it's important that we recognize it in this age, and the kind of central thrust of that argument that is coming from your book to our audience.
Okay, so there are two really important things. There's two ways we are cutting ourselves off from each other that I think is of huge detriment And I think one only needs to look at world politics to see this come like amplifying and amplifying and amplifying. But there's two things. One is this general idea that we are removed from our ancestors, that somehow everyone was very, very stupid until the Enlightenment, and
Yeah.
after that we started to smarten up. And the reason we think that, and the only reason we think that, is it's very, very hard for us to understand the worldview of our ancestors. But if you take the time to do so, and this includes Indigenous people that we come across,
Sure.
as you do so, you find that nothing they do really lasts unless there's a reason for them to do it. So rather than just being, I mean, superstition is a thing, but you'll find when someone does a ritual, or it frequently there is a reason for it. And the problem is we expect them to explain it on our terms, but we are the very strange people in history, not them. Throughout history, people have never sought to be objective until basically the late scientific age. Even early science includes magic and divinations, and so alchemy, for instance.
Sure.
Oh, my chemical experiment's not going so well, so I will summon an angel to help me find the solution.
And
Okay.
even the idea that we're capable of being objective is still a live debate that I don't think anyone's
Yeah, that's where I was going to get to. So
right.
objectivity is not something you achieve. It's something you orientate yourself, navigate yourself towards, because we are all humans filtering the world through our subjectivity, including scientists. Good scientists know this. This is why they never give 100% for anything. They're always like saying, well, there's and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but 99.9999996 chance that a Higgs boson is a real thing.
Yeah.
And like the journalists are going, can't you just say it's real? It's like, no, I'm not allowed by the,
Well, anyone who's familiar with the philosophy of science will know that the scientific method is a method of disproving, not a method of proving. So the idea that we can arrive at certain truths is already out the window with science. Yeah.
It's only about making good predictions. It's all it is. It's making good predictions, which is what divination seeks to do too. So divination and science came from a common human want, if not, and some people even that I think it's plausible that science even came out from divination.
Well, to the degree that natural philosophy took divination seriously and science is the child of natural philosophy, I think that they don't just come from a common want, they come from a common tradition.
Now, just before, people get up in arms and backlash and turn this off and scream woo, I'd like to point out that the word scientist was first coined in 1833 by William Whewell. Before that, they were called natural philosophers, as you've suggested. And before that, they were alchemists and things like that. Now, each time they changed the name, they changed the values very slightly too. So while there's not that much difference between a natural philosopher and a scientist, the natural philosophers were still deeply attached to the concept of humanism. Humanism came out from Islamic and Christian humanism, which is the idea of, it's called the Book of Nature by some people, that good Christians should study the Bible and the Book of Nature, which is you should go out and discover the world because it's God's creation. You're therefore worshipping God by discovering his creation. And this puts an end to this ridiculous idea that religion and science have been at odds all through history.
Yeah.
Because around this time, with the natural philosophers and the Renaissance alchemists, it was considered an act of worship to do science or proto-science. A lot of the practitioners were things like Catholic Jesuit priests, monks like Gregor Mendel, and the Catholic Church frequently funded scientific endeavors, and they actually still do up to a small point.
Well, the classic example that people use of the conflict between the church and science is this idea that the that the Earth goes around the sun. But what is less known is that suggestion hung in the air for like 30 or 40 years before the church started to move against it. And I think it's historically sound to say the reason why the church moved against it is not because of the rejection of science, but because at the time the Counter-Reformation was starting to occur, and because European society was starting to fracture, the church decided that introducing new and radical destructive ideas to the kind of cultural background of Europe at that time, a time which was immediately before the 30 Years' War and all of those terrible things, was probably not a good idea. So I think we can assign a geopolitical valency rather than an ideological valency.
Well, that's almost always the case. Yeah. So let's clarify a couple of things. Let's clarify.
Yes, and also let's commit ourselves to giving our audience, if they are strict rationalist scientific types, let's commit ourselves to giving those people in our audience a current through this conversation, so that there's never going to be a moment where they're going to go, no, I'm definitely out now.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully. Yeah. So the first thing, let me define magic the way I'm using it. Mm-hmm. I've slightly tweaked it so that I think it's more used to modern people. I want people to be able to, I want people to be able to understand, go into look at historical books, indigenous cultures and things like that, and start looking for why they're doing what they're doing when they're engaging with magic. All cultures engaged with magic in the past, and I actually believe all still do, including our own, and we'll get into that. So, and the other thing was this, generally our society is fracturing over ideological lines, some political, but we are seeing currently like another huge spiritual uprising, similar to what happened around 1850, and then again during the 1960s with the psychedelic movement.
What was the 1850 uprising? Was that Victorian magic?
Around 1850s, you had, no, it was so many things. You got spiritualism, you got the Baha'i faith, you got Mormonism, you got the Theosophy Society, and then later Anthroposophy from Rudolf Steiner.
The introduction of Hinduism to the West through the Raj.
Absolutely. You also got the beginnings of the modern, the late scientific age that we're in now. So where it switched from natural philosophy into science with scientists. Yeah. The way we think of it now. So cool. So I'm going to define magic, then I'm going to define religion, and then we'll talk about science. And we'll talk about what each are looking for, and how they behave a little bit like a big game of paper, rock, scissors.
Sure.
Okay, so the way I'm defining magic, my favorite definition is one by Dion Fortune, and she adapted hers from Aleister Crowley, I believe, but I slightly prefer hers. So my one's adapted again. I say magic is the ability to shift or manipulate the perception in accordance with the will. Before that, I think Dion Fortune said it was the ability to make changes in the consciousness.
And Crowley's was the ability to cause changes in accordance with will. And I think he meant it more in the material sense, but anyway.
Yes, so I think his is a little too hard to pin down. And I think hers is problematic in the modern age because we have the scientific hard problem of consciousness and everything. So I use perception. Cool. So the ability to manipulate the perception in accordance with the will. This allows us to compare many things. It allows us to compare what happens when I play music and I cause people with my will to dance and have a good time. Something I consider charm magic. They think they wanted to dance, but I made them dance if I'm doing my job properly.
Okay.
To what actors do, to what advertising is trying to do when you see the golden arches and as you're driving along, and often subconsciously, you don't even register it. You just feel like a hamburger. This goes in as pure primal desire. And anyone who thinks they're completely immune to this is just not noticing it.
Yeah,
So
I
have
think
a,
you can be ignorant of it, but I don't think it's
yeah,
possible to argue against the idea
no,
that minds are affected by their environment. That's just a
yes.
non-starter.
So advertising psychology is a magical study as far as I'm concerned by my definition of magic. If people don't like my definition of magic, that's fine. Just understand that when I say magic, I'm talking about the ability to manipulate perception in accordance with the will.
Can I give you a quote from Mircea Eliade
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
supports your point?
Thank you.
He says, insofar as science and the manipulation of phantasms are concerned, magic is, or phantasms being like
Yeah.
our internal perceptual models, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Magic is primarily directed at the human imagination, in which it attempts to create lasting impressions. The magician of the Renaissance is both psychoanalyst and prophet, as well as the precursor of modern professions such as director of public relations,
Yeah.
propagandist, spy, politician, censor, director of mass communication media, and publicity agent.
Yes, very good. That's all often missed.
Yeah.
Especially look at someone like John Dee. I won't go on too much into here, but the sheer number of things he achieved in his lifetime is quite stunning. From political propaganda to literally being a spy. I mean,
A genuine
they,
Renaissance man.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so what magic is trying to do is manipulate perception for an end. Now, I'm being completely morally neutral here when I explain it because I believe magic can be used for extreme good, from counseling and things like that to actually help people's mental health by reframing, things like narrative therapy,
Sure.
things like hypnosis, things like placebo effect, I think is all genuine magic. It could also be used to manipulate people. Now, okay, so the you at the beginning you asked me if I wanted to use an alias, and I said no, I'd like to use my real name. And one of the reasons is that you cannot cause any change in the world by wielding any kind of power without first being changed yourself. First thing that any spell you do will at first be enacted on your own mind. Um, to keep myself honest so that people can have me up if I go in the wrong direction, I like using my own name, being approachable, and this is why I appear publicly as a wizard and why I do most of my magic in public, not in private in a coven or something. So I do not consider myself an occultist.
Right, because you're not practicing hidden arts.
No, I'm trying to do it openly. Even though I will draw from occult things occasionally, I'll
Can
do it
I?
in the open.
What do you? Are you? What do you think about esotericism? This idea that there's an inner and outer temple, and that the outer temple is for the public and the inner temple is for the, what would you call them, aficionados? Does that contravene your commitment?
It contravenes my commitment, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing in general.
Sure.
It might be useful, and there might be advantages to doing that way, but it's not the way I'm going.
Okay.
I think we are now adult enough as a society that we don't have to hide information from each other. We're living in a glorious time
Yeah.
where we can disseminate information without being punished. I think a lot of the initiatory stuff started off with the fact that it was blasphemy, and we can get away with a lot more blasphemy than we used to, and not even considered blasphemy anymore. So I think the time is right to talk about this stuff. I'd also say beware of anyone who claims to have wholesale information on how to live your life or be a glorious magician. But first you must pay lots of money and jump through 12 levels of initiation and go through and it's like usually when you like read books of people who've been through that, got fed up with it, things like Scientology and stuff, they come out the other end going, look, it's not that there was nothing there, like there was some quite good stuff there, it's just that they claimed to know everything. They claim to know the secrets of the universe, and I came away with like 3 or 4 really useful things, but I paid like $500,000
Oh my gosh.
and it's 30 years of
Yeah.
my life on it. It's like, why not just go straight into it? If you don't understand it, you don't understand it. Spend more time. It's like we're adult enough to deal with this now, I think. That's the way I feel. I think
Yeah.
sometimes Maybe my approach will occasionally miss something out, but I think in general, I'd rather treat my audience like grown-up adults, not people who need to jump through hoops.
That's right. I
Cool.
recently read Dion Fortune's The Magical Battle of Britain, and it was really
Yeah.
interesting to get an insight into the way that her magical order operated.
Right.
Yeah, and was very much operating on an esotericist model, and
Yeah.
I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that she pursued it in a moral way.
Cool. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. I'm also not out to be anyone's guru. I just love these ideas, and I think other people could use them.
Well,
And I'm
imagine how
trying
much
to
of a pain
encourage
in the
people.
imagine how much of a pain in the ass it would be someone's guru, having them tagging you, following you around, asking you questions about things all the time. They're like, look, there's no
Yeah.
secrets in the world. Everything's written down. You've got a library card.
Yeah.
Get back to me when we can have a conversation about something interesting.
No, personally, I find it kind of gross. And
I think that's a reasonable reaction.
part of it is like when you're going out on a limb with some different ideas, and I'm not saying all these ideas are mine, but I'm coming up with a few new things, I think, hopefully, that people can use, people are welcome to use, is in order for someone to show me I'm wrong, but I actually have to put myself out there and go, look, this is what I think is going on.
Yeah.
The best thing that could possibly happen to me is someone show me I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Being right sucks. Being right all the time is really annoying.
It limits your
I want
growth.
to learn something new. Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
learn something new. So I think I'm right, but if someone wants to challenge me, that's all fine and dandy. And yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Cool. So magic, we've talked a bit about magic. What religion's trying to do, I think a lot of people get this wrong. If we look at
did you have a definition for religion before we
Yeah.
move into discussing it?
Now, I think the problem is if you look it up in a dictionary, I think you get all these kind of things all these definitions that are a little bit obscured by history. But I'd like to go back to what I feel is the original intent of the word from the word religion, which comes from Latin.
Religion.
And it has religio, and it's got that term in it that is related to the term ligature.
What's that? A binding?
To bind. So my working definition for religion, and I feel this is the only definition I've come across that allows us to compare all the things that people consider religion seriously, is to bind a group together in common belief. This allows us to deal away with the fact that not all religions are theistic. It's possible to be an atheist Buddhist.
Sure.
Cool. Now, given that it's to bind a group together in common belief, the core value, the thing held most valuable, is the group. Keeping the group together. This is why religion is suspicious of magic, because the core value behind magic is the will of an individual magician, even if he's working for his group.
Mm-hmm.
So religions are always started by magicians in a sense. But once you've got the group going, you're trying to keep the group going. So therefore, if another magician comes in and starts messing with your rituals and your rules and asking questions, you could see how that would be threatening to the group, and because how the group's more important in religion and the individual's more important in magic. This is why they annoy each other.
And following the maxim that wizards can never agree, you can see how it would instantly become an
Not that
issue.
we never agree, but it's that we do tend to argue a lot. Yeah.
And also that explains why there's a religion which is called orthodox, right? One voice. Right. Because the whole point of it is to bring everything into alignment around a collectively held principle.
Yeah. So basically, if you push a religious person, it's like, well, why do you do it? Why do you do it? Why do you do it? Because it's the thing we do as a group, and we've always done it. So go away.
Yeah,
and
it is its own justification. It doesn't require. What's that saying? Anything worth doing requires no further justification, and religion is one of those.
Yeah, if you're trying to keep the group together, then that's the right way to behave.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, but it's also why you would be suspicious of magicians.
And it's also why you might get a wee creeping chill up your spine when you hear too many people say the same thing in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. So religion and apart from that, apart from magic being focused on the individual will, if someone wants to get something done, like a musician in front of an audience, like an artist in front of a canvas, they are both dealing with the manipulation and by manipulation, I mean completely neutrally. I don't mean in a nasty way, but they're
Yeah.
both dealing with the manipulation of the perception and people's subjectivity. Religion is not inherently objective, and when you try and make it objective, it gets really, really silly and becomes, modern fundamentalism and things like that.
Well, this is
Cool.
exactly why the scientific religions that people tried to pioneer in the late 19th century immediately
Yeah.
fell apart and went
Like,
nowhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
19th century. And earlier, there were two churches they tried to start out of the French Revolution. One was a deistic church and the other one was an atheistic church. And I think they lasted about a year and a half.
Well, that's pretty good going on average.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly what they're called, but yeah, I find it hilarious. They were like, we hate religion, we're getting rid of it, we're like killing religious leaders that don't follow our secularization, but we're going to start two churches.
Yeah.
We're going to emulate, yeah.
Yeah.
And so just as a side note, if you are looking to rebel, if you're listening and you're a rebellious person who's fed up with the status quo, do not rebel by merely inverting the values. Don't just go, everything that was good is now bad and everything that is bad is now good. It's a little bit like growing up in a soccer family and getting annoyed and hating soccer and saying, I'm going to rebel against my soccer-loving family that made me play soccer every weekend by joining the team they hate and playing soccer against them. Okay? A much better approach is to be a magician about it, understand where the rules are, and change the rules of the game. Then you might get somewhere. Otherwise, you are merely trapping yourself in exactly the same game playing by the other team. If you're a Christian and you're fed up and you become a Satanist, it might give you like some dopamine hits and it might like make you feel a little bit better in the short term. And it might be like a stepping stone, but you don't want to stay there very long.
You haven't exited the cosmology, that's for sure.
No, you're still stuck. You're still tethered to the same system. Try something really different that takes a bit more effort, and you'll probably come right around the other side eventually after a couple of decades realizing, oh, now I understand what the religion I grew up in much better.
Yeah, you might walk backwards to the place where you were originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least to respect why it's there and what it's for. Cool. So religion doesn't like magic very much because it's individual will and religion's based on a group. Science is dealing with the objective and religion and magic are dealing with the subjective. Sorry?
Do we have a definition for science before we move into discussing science?
It's the attempt, you could probably help me with this, but it's the attempt to make the best possible predictions. To measure the world. It's about measuring. Make measurements of the world to create systems in which you can make the best possible predictions with the most certainty.
So it would be fair. I mean, I think we all know what science is, so maybe the definition is redundant, but let's just say that when you're using the word science, it's not anything else than the accepted orthodox philosophical understanding of what science is.
Exactly.
Okay. So I think we can move forward on that.
Yeah, so science is obviously, it's just not going to have much to say about magic because magic is based on subjectivity and subjectivity is very, very difficult to measure. An example of this is you can do science on some magic, but not directly on the experience. So whether or not ghosts are real, I strongly suspect that we will never find scientific evidence that ghosts are real because they're not objects.
Yeah.
However, ghost experiences are real, and you can do science on ghost experiences, and you can go around collecting data on ghost experiences and compare them across cultures, and you can induce people with various environmental changes or drugs or whatever and see if they have ghost experiences. But I don't think you're going to be able to say whether ghost is real, because it's inherently something not measurable.
Well, it's pretty easy to induce a ghost experience, and we know how to do it. It's really simple. You get a group of your friends, you go to a place in the forest that you've never been to before, you stay up late until you're really tired and and you really want to go to sleep but don't do it, and then tell each other the spookiest ghost stories that you can, and then when you need to go for a pee, walk out into the forest somewhere where you're by yourself and try not to see a ghost. You won't be able to.
In fact, I've played with this for myself lots and lots and lots. I've lived next to forests a few times in my life, and I've really enjoyed walking around the forest entirely by myself to see if I can reconcile all the weird little hallucinations one gets in their peripheral vision. Maybe hallucination is a strong word, but all the things you see, the pareidolia, the epiphania that one gets from the noisy, sort of blurry side vision.
What do those words mean?
Pareidolia and epiphania both mean, if I'm saying it right, pareidolia for sure, it means to find patterns amongst chaotic elements. To see patterns. So like how people have a tendency to see faces everywhere.
Sure.
Or like cloud watching is pareidolia. It's like
Perfect
a fun version of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So walking around, and that was a little bit to gain some personal confidence. And I think I just enjoyed that, like teetering on the edge of anxiety of walking around at night and seeing if I can control my mind and keep in control, despite the fact that you're genuinely seeing freaky half shadow monstery things outside of the corners of your eyes.
It's pretty amazing to just like see with your own eyes werewolves and crawling corpses and all kinds of giant bats and all of that kind of thing. Those are the sorts of things that I see when I walk around the forest by myself.
Oh, there we go.
When you look up at the sky and the overlapping areas of the branches, they move over each other from one tree to the next, and you can see the light beside them. That movement is the thing that really sets off my imagination.
Yeah, but that's pareidolia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. So I hope does that kind of help people understand where I'm coming from with magic. So I guess I should give a couple of examples of things we do in the modern world that are magic, that fit my definition. So placebo effect is definitely one.
Okay.
Now, often people are a little bit unsure about what placebo effect means, or they think they know what it means. I'm going with the proper scientific understanding of it, which we're updating every so often. Now, I know most people understand this, but some people think it means stuff that doesn't work. Oh, that's just placebo. It's just placebo. It's quite the opposite. It's stuff that shouldn't work but does anyway. So hopefully most of us on the same page with that. But another people go, oh, well, it's just playing with belief, because if you're just making someone believe something. So it's basically like a calculated lie. So that's actually not quite true, though belief comes into placebo as one of the tools that makes it work. It's been shown in recent studies that even when someone knows they're getting a sham drug, it still has a placebo effect.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something different than just conscious belief. And then people go, oh, well, it's just sugar pills. It's like, no, the placebo effect is not something that scientists measure against because it's convenient. If it wasn't there, it would be much easier to do science. Placebo effect is there because we can't remove it. So the only reason we test things against placebo is that all medicines are placebos, just some of them happen to also be drugs. Does this make sense?
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective before.
Amongst the things that cause changes in placebo effect that make things more efficient, the color of the uniform the doctor's wearing, the color that the hospital room is painted, the things that the doctor has on the wall, whether he's got his qualifications on the wall or not, the name of the medicine, Is
Absolutely.
placebo effect. The size and shape and color of the pill,
I
all of
read
these things.
that with when it comes to size and shapes of pills, the
Yeah,
placebo effect gets stronger when the pill gets larger and larger,
yeah,
unless the pill is really small, and then
yeah,
it's like the placebo effect is really strong because the people
yeah,
taking it, that this is the explanation that I've heard, I've no idea if it's
yeah.
right, go, oh, this pill's tiny, it must be really strong.
Really potent. Yeah,
Yeah, it
like if I
must be
had
a
too
potent
much,
thing.
I'd explode or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds good to me.
yeah.
So placebo effect is a part of medicine we can't remove that appears to be magical. And by magical, I mean it shifts people's perception. So hopefully that explains. Another type of magic that is scientifically verified is hypnosis. It's another one we do not have a good understanding of why it works.
Sure.
Um, now, I should state that none of these things and no magic in a general understanding of it does everything. If anyone claims to you that something does everything, then you should probably avoid that. So hypnosis, you can do things like give someone brain surgery and but hypnotize them out of feeling pain.
Ah,
Now the brain doesn't feel a lot of pain, so it's not like a major thing. But like it's certainly cutting into someone's skull is painful.
sure.
But and that's not an unusual thing that neuroscientists do. That's the norm for certain surgeries because they need to know whether they're damaging the person as when they're operating on their brain. And one way to do that is to talk to them. Like for instance, when you are mucking around with someone's motor cortex, this is how weird the human brain evolved, how weirdly it evolved. When you talk about running, your motor cortex lights up. So like if they're like making sure they're not messing up someone's ability to conceptualize running and to run, one way to do it is to go, can you imagine you're running along the side of a stream for a little while, poke, poke, poke. Oh no, cool.
Wow.
It's working. Yeah, and the same parts of the brain will light up as when they're actually running, roughly,
Yeah.
more or less. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same when you're dreaming about running. So our abstract conceptions evolved in a piggyback fashion on our actual bodily actions
Well,
in
it
many
makes sense
cases.
that they would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hypnosis is one. Um, I think I talked a little bit about advertising.
Sure.
Uh, I've got some fun stories about that, but once I was watching a movie on TV and it got to the ad break, and I thought, I really feel like a pinky bar. I think I will. I think I've got just enough time to hop in my car, drive quickly to the dairy, buy a pinky bar, and come back and like not miss much of the movie.
Yeah.
And I found myself sitting back in the chair holding a pinky bar, going, "What the fuck just happened?" I don't think I've ever bought a pinky bar before. It's not my favorite chocolate bar. It's not one I generally eat. And then I realized, oh, the movie was the Tim Burton version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the next ad break there was an ad for Pinky Bus. And like I said, oh god damn it, I am not too smart to be affected by advertising at all. And I gave up TV at that point and started to feel a lot better.
You decided that you
That,
didn't want to be programmed like that anymore.
yeah, that is charm magic if ever I've come across it. So a lot of the things we do. Another thing that okay, so we assume. I mean, it's pretty clear that many of our ancestors were animists. They thought that the world was imbued with souls, and that
Sure.
animals were imbued with souls, and rivers were imbued with souls. And we still get remnants of this when we relate to Maoritanga and the various indigenous things. If we even look into our own ancestries, if we are Caucasians or Europeans, we find it's the same seems to be the same for all cultures,
Sure.
that the places that you came from were special and frequently were personified or thought to be imbued with spirit. So, but we assume that as a post-enlightenment culture, we are smarter than that and we've gotten beyond it. But I'd like to suggest that we haven't. Here's a scenario. You're late for work and you get into your car and it just won't start. And just for a moment, you swear loudly at the car and thump on the dashboard as if the car has a spirit that can be negotiated with and can be punished for not obeying your will. And then you quickly come back to your senses and go, oh no, the car's a machine and it's broken. Just for that split second, almost beyond your emotional control, you were an animist. Yeah, we slip into that all the time.
Yeah. So is it your suggestion that in the past that psychological state that we slipped into was the majority state that we were of?
Yeah.
The majority of time that we spent was in that state rather than in this current, what we think of as modern rationalist.
I'm suggesting it was the dominant narrative for how we understood the way the world works. Because we didn't have objectivity, the world we had was a subjective world. And by the way, I should just clarify, there's two, people often poo-poo the word subjective, but they're getting confused between two things. I'm not talking about your own personal experience that's really interesting to you, but no one else really cares about. I'm talking about the shared subjective experience that we can actually repeat and do magical experiences on.
Right.
Okay. So like I can't as a person completely invade your private world and completely experience it, but we can share experiences. And it's this shared space where language is, which is what we're doing now, where interviews happen, where I affirm your existence with what I'm saying and you affirm mine, and our consciousness gets directed towards each other. This is the place where we can engage with magic, and that can be extended out into a group, like a rave or a ritual or an African drum circle or whatever.
Yeah, this interfacial zone is automatically magical. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, language. Okay, so here's another fun. Here's two other fun ideas that are related.
Can you hold that for a second, because I'd like to ask you a question about the previous subject. Do you buy the idea of a descent of spirituality in which humanity has moved from a zone where... are you hearing that vacuum cleaner in the background?
A little.
It's not too bad. Not too bad. Okay. We've a zone from where everything was divine but not differentiated from each other, to a space where everything was divine but differentiated from each other, in the sense that all of the world was God, then all of the world was full of gods, then the number of gods shrunk down into archetypal particular gods. So we moved from an animist to a sort of pantheon style religiosity, to a monotheistic religiosity, to a zero number of gods that we are now.
No,
religiosity.
I don't agree with that at all.
You don't accept the descent of religion in that sense?
No, because all of those things still exist.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, they are all places we can still go experientially. And what you are presenting to me is something I call a ladder cosmology.
That's fair.
And I think it's my favorite way to engage with the world. I think somehow with people like Descartes or something, we got kind of screwed up.
I'd agree with that.
I think in the past, most mystical traditions had ladder cosmologies. This is to say, if at the bottom of the physical world you hit a rock and it hurts your toes, and it's an undeniable, like you can keep hitting the rock and kicking the rock and it still hurts your toes. That's like that kind of bodily action. And as you go up here, we're talking conceptually through language, so we're somewhere near the middle or the upper middle of the cosmology. And if you keep climbing up, at the bottom you've got all the pieces from which things are made, the reductionist thing, and at the top you've got the eternal void of creativity from which everything emanates, which is the monad or Ein Sof or Brahman. And I think these are all places that these are just maps, like the Kabbalah Sephiroth, the Kabbalah tree of life is the most complex one I've come across, but I believe chakras are trying to do this too. Sure. These are attempts to map human perception, human experience, and human states of consciousness. And the fact that we are capable of feeling these things means they've all been around. Now, I don't think we started from something emanating from the Or, though I could be wrong, it almost feels like our ancestors started with their immediate surroundings and then having trees having personalities, and especially the things they were trying to interact with, like they were trying to catch deer or something, so they had to interact with the whole spirit of all the deer
Sure.
and make deals with it. And then they had to reconcile the fact they're killing something, and that you are an animal, and you're killing an animal if you're a hunter. So you have to reconcile that morally. So you come up with a narrative whereby you've made a deal.
That's Bataille's argument.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. So you've got this kind of thing. I think it probably, I could be wrong, but it seems like if you look historically, it actually took us a while to get to this idea of a monad. So there were creator gods and things, and usually we sprung from the earth or some way, or we were made from the clay, or...
Yeah, I have a certain level of skepticism around the transferences that people do when studying magic, due to the inheritance from the Order of the Golden Dawn, who built all of those massive tables of transferences where gold and the sun and lions are all related to each other. But it's really important for me to not commit an error of assuming the fact that we make those transferences meant that in history those transferences were also valid. So when you talk about when you talk about a monad, that's a really useful concept. But then on the other hand, if we look at Greek mythology of what the starting point of, like the kind of ground of creation that came about right at the very beginning of Hesiod's Theogony, where Gaia is this sort of a void, but not a negative void, instead of a creative, fructifying void, right? Those two concepts are both really useful and can sit in the same place, but how much can we transfer from one to the other? My argument would be almost zero.
I think so. You're comparing the
monad and the
monad and
Hesiod's conception of Gaia.
Chaos.
Yeah, the fertile chaos of the original.
Actually, because they're all on the European line, and I think what we're talking about is a particular cultural line with the Golden Dawn. And I think if you want more unusual lines, then go outside of. I mean, you and I will have some cultural commonality here.
Absolutely.
So forgive anyone who's from a distinctly different non-European culture who's listening. But if we were to go right outside our cultural lines, I think that would be the place to compare to, because the idea of a lion in the sun and gold all being compared together is because that's an alchemical arrangement, which in turn is based on like biblical theology.
So we could chart it through the Golden Dawn, through the alchemists, through the Bible, back to...
I strongly suspect so.
Else. Yeah.
And probably through astrology too, yes.
Yeah, so I'm sure that all of those things have interconnections. I just don't want to make the error of saying that this is equal to that, and therefore simplifying the mythologies that we inherit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
By attempting to falsely unify them.
Cool. Yeah. So, however, I find it interesting you compared the monad with Greek chaos, the original word chaos, not necessarily how we use it in English.
Yeah.
In Greek system, the world emanates from chaos. Mm-hmm. With the Kabbalistic one, which is Ein Sof, which is the void of endless creativity from which everything emanates.
Well, those two concepts are definitely having large overlap.
Well, they're pretty much all the same thing. They are all from the European line.
Yeah, where do we get the concept of monads from? Because I think of it in terms of a philosophical term from, I forget the name of a guy, someone who
I'm not
used them.
sure, but it's the generalist philosophical term for these things. Right. It just means, no, it doesn't mean a one. It means a universality. It doesn't mean everything comes from a single point. It means everything comes from... Okay, we're getting into logos here. Logos is the human ability to... Well, actually, the ability of all creatures to draw boundaries around things so they can separate one concept from another. That's how I understand it.
Interesting. When I think of the term logos, I think of the fundamental underlying formulaic rationality that lends structure to existence.
Oh, interesting. No, I see it this way. Logos, like as a human being, you've got to operate in the world. So, like, you're sitting on a chair
Sure.
and you got a microphone. You got to know where one thing starts. You got to know where your body ends and where objects start. You got to know where a concept starts. And because we're using language, you have to know where concepts end. And this ability to draw up boundaries around things is logos.
Okay.
It can be termed logos, and this is my understanding. Well, it's definitely used in magic this way, in magical practices. It's used in psychoanalysis this way up to a point, and I believe it's at least a fair interpretation of what Heraclitus was trying to say when he said, "You never stand in the same river twice."
Right. Yeah,
Trying to point
I'm
out
sure that
river's a
is.
process, not a thing,
I'm sure
but it's
that's an
still a logos.
extremely dense philosophical concept, not just a simple factoid.
But let's say that it's pattern recognition in a sense. It's your ability to see one pattern instead of another. So the void is the place where, in a sense, where everything is possible, but there's no logos yet. Okay, so that's the monad. The monad, or the chaos, or the Ein Sof, is that endless void from which there's no logos. And then in the Genesis, there's the passage where they say, in the beginning there was the word.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't the word, there was the logos. Like that's translated from the Greek word logos. In the beginning there was the logos. So in the beginning there was suddenly the ability to differentiate one thing from another. And until you have that, you can't do anything. You're just living in an eternal soup.
And
right?
I think that same verse or book says that existence was drawn forth out of a formless void. And I've heard the argument that the formless void is just a placeholder for nothingness from which you can't go beyond. But I don't buy that. I think that there is actually a primordial soup, an undifferentiated chaos of everything.
Opposite of nothingness. It's undifferentiated. That's it. Undifferentiated everything. That's what it is.
It's an effusive, fertile, all-producing variety of chaotic mixture.
This is why the deluge or the flood or great bodies of water in the Bible and the Hebraic tradition, Judaic tradition, are the opposite of logos. They are that which washes away as a symbol. It's why the rain, the 40 days and 40 nights flood, the sort of thing. And to explain this, it's the opposite. It's when your logos is all washed away through tragic circumstances. It's the emotional feeling of such, and sometimes it's the literal thing, like there were 12 houses on our street, the tidal wave came in, and now there's just water. Okay, so now I can't go in my house, I can't differentiate my house, I can't differentiate the water from my street, it's just endless nothing. It's the emotional feeling you would have if we picked you up in a helicopter and flew you out to the middle of the ocean and just plopped you in there and said goodbye. It's like, okay, you know where your body is, but you've got no idea how far down the water goes, or how far that way, or how far that way, how far that way. That feeling, that's loss of logos.
Interesting.
So there's order, so that's chaos. That's true chaos. Cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting to investigate the etymology of these words, because often there are so many definitions for a specific word, particularly chaos in this case. So that's why I really enjoy us taking the time to isolate and investigate the specific definitions that we're applying for each of them. Yeah.
So the original question or thread, I believe, was something like, do I think that people started in believing like in a monad type thing, and then they slowly differentiated it down until
the narrative of descent.
I think the way human beings are built is that we are creatures that live on a physical relationship with our environment and many stacked layers of abstract. And the fact that we can't get to the absolute truth of it is of the world is made up from many parts, or it emanates from a whole, or any of these in-betweens, is just basically, I believe, because we're not evolved with the end view of being able to understand the world.
Mm-hmm.
That
Is
was
that
not a
is that
given.
an observation about our psychology or an observation about material existence, or is that question not really relevant?
It's in a sense not relevant. Well, it's not that it's not relevant. It's just unanswerable.
Mm.
So I don't think it necessarily. I think the way we tell our stories developed over time, but I think human beings have roughly been human beings for like 300,000 years, maybe
Yeah,
longer.
I
You
think
know.
that's fair. But this is actually a diversion because you were about to talk about two other things, and then I wanted to ask you about the theory of spiritual descent, which you've rejected. Do you remember what those other two
No,
points that
sorry,
you
I
wanted to
don't.
make after that were going to be?
No.
Okay.
We got too far off track. We need to swim back to order.
I don't think I can swim upriver in this case.
Yeah.
All right. Was there another point that from your book that you wanted to talk about in terms of the interrelationship between magic, religion, and science?
Um. Does that make sense to you?
What
There's lots I
the
could go on. The way that these things, what they're trying to get done in the world, and why they sometimes get on each other's work, and
Yeah, like in the sense that magic is something that we personally use our will to achieve to do with our beliefs. Religion is a
yeah,
method of binding people together, and science
yeah,
is the attempt at objectivity. I can see how, because
yeah,
those are necessarily different end goals, then the
yeah.
pursuit of those end goals will necessarily entail different methods and very
That's right.
likely contravene the interests of people who are
Yeah.
pursuing those end goals when they meet people who are pursuing any one of the other end goals.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that's my primary point. I could give many examples from history and that sort of stuff, or
Mm-hmm.
many. There's quite a few ways in the modern world that we think about the stuff that I think we is are historically wrong.
Mm-hmm. All right, let
Like,
me prod some of your
yeah,
suggestions. If
cool.
magic is to do with perception manipulation,
Mm.
where would you draw the outside boundary of where that is? And I ask that question because it seems to me that I can't draw that boundary. If magic is to do with perception and we are always interrelating with other people, then cultural production seems like a magical act, and therefore
Mm.
it seems to me that the cultural life world that we exist within can only be described as a magical object in total, in which case I find it
Ah,
difficult to draw a boundary between the personal
yeah,
act of will of me doing a magical act, which I absolutely think is correct,
yeah,
yeah, from my own experience. And
yeah,
also, it seems like culture is a collective self hypnosis that we constantly go through and
yes,
can't
but
be
it's not under a
outside.
singular will. So culture can be seen as a web of spells in a sense,
Okay.
and we there's other things going on too.
Yeah.
So one, I could get into what I believe spirits are and try and explain those in a way that hopefully
Okay.
will at least make sense to a rationalist,
Um, is there.
because culture is a web of spirits as well.
Well,
And
first
by
of all, can
spirit,
you.
I'm yeah,
Is there a place where you can draw the line? It sounds like you're drawing a line for what magic is, but as
with a
differentiated from
will, with a
culture,
will.
where,
So at
with
some
the
point, it's got
individual
to
will.
come. Yeah, I believe that to discuss magic as magicians, we probably need to discuss it there. Now, whose will is a difficult question because as a human being, you probably don't have a singular will all the time.
Mm.
You know
I
this because
contain
you probably,
multitudes.
yes, you have arguments with yourself in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the type of thing where a magician has to sort out whether they're acting on hunger or lust or creativity or trying to imbue themselves with a legacy or
Yeah.
out of jealousy or all these different things can be sub wills. And this is why some fields like Carl Jung's psychoanalysis trying to deal with individuation, trying to bring all these towards a common goal.
Well,
Or
it seems to me that the strength of the magical act for the individual is specifically drawing all of the varieties of internal dissension that one experiences
yeah,
as multiple wills in towards a singly focused point, in which case all of your potentiality as a human
yeah,
being is focused towards a particular goal, It seems to me that's the strength of a magical act.
It is because for the simple reason that if you're going to go for a run and you want to get there as fast as possible, it helps if all of your body is running in the same direction.
Right. Yeah, if you try and run in a lot of directions at once, you might not get there very quickly. I'll give you
It's
that.
precisely what someone who's not good at running is actually doing.
Yeah.
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 So, okay, but there's this other difficult thing is there are you suggested collective wills, and that can happen. And there's also the ways in which we spring forth wills that are no longer. And this we're getting into difficult territory here, but I'll try and explain it.
Okay.
There's collective wills because the religion has the will of the group as the will, and all religion uses magical practices that were created by individuals. I guess some of them can naturally evolve from improvised sessions with a group too, or evolve a group. But that, religions are often started by individuals. So there is this collective will, and there's things that are magic there, but they're not obeying the individual's will, they're obeying the will of the group. And then you get into things like corporations. Now, this does overlap with the idea of spirits. So, here's a weird example in our modern world. For example, a lot of people are concerned about the environment. A lot of people feel stuck. They wish they could operate in a way in the world that's less harmful to the environment. So you can end up with a situation where you've got a corporation, and everyone working in that corporation might actually want to pollute less. So say it's a fast food company, and someone in the board meeting says, "Oh, let's move to wooden forks and wooden cutlery instead of plastic cutlery because it's more sustainable." And everyone can put up their hand and say that's a good idea, and the company can still have a will that's separate from that and decide, no, that's not what we're going to do. And this is because when companies have investors, they have to follow investment law, and in many cases, a company can be sued by the people who have shares in it if they have not been seen to maximize profits.
Sure.
They can be sued if they're not being seen to maximize profits. That means everyone who works in the company can say, "Wooden forks, please," and the investors can say, "No, that's going to drop a few cents off our investment, so we veto that." This means effectively, and you can think of this in terms of it being a huge algorithm, if you like, that the company, one, is an entity, two, behaves in the world as if it has a willpower, three, that this willpower can be entirely separate and even at odds with everyone who's working in the company as its body.
Well, the analogy there can be like the cells in your body resisting suicide.
Exactly. Okay. So in this way, you're talking about culture. Do you see how we now have a higher level of abstraction? A lot of terms in culture. It's like lots of people are fed up with their own culture, and yet they do it anyway.
Yeah,
There are these higher willpowers that emanate out of human groups. Is this making sense?
It is. I'm just wondering to myself if it's possible for a person to move outside of their culture.
Perhaps not, but
it might be the case that a person who is raised in a culture, everything they do, even attempting to get out of that culture, is only the reproduction of the culture. Or it could be the case that a person who is raised in a culture can, every time they're exposed to ideas that are sourced from outside that culture, give that person a way out.
I just mean, say there's something in your culture that you have to do to get along with people, but you think is a dumb idea.
Yeah.
Right. So you can probably think of a couple.
I think we can all relate to that.
Yeah. Okay. Two, can you consider that you might be hanging out with a group of people where everyone amongst that group of people thinks it's a dumb idea, and yet you still can't find yourself not doing it in the group?
Absolutely.
Okay, so whose will are you obeying then? I'd argue that that there's these higher things. Now, when I say will at this point, we're getting a little abstract because these particular wills can be the things that appear to have will to us, like a corporation can appear to be entirely orientated towards churning up trees and turning them into money, even when everyone wants to keep those trees together. Like the law might be as such. And the law is a whole bunch of things that I also consider spells in many cases.
Sure. So the concept egregore is useful here, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have on hand a convenient potted definition for what an egregore is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a spirit created by a group or a magician, a group of magicians or a singular magician, in order to get a particular purpose done in the world. Cool. So it's like, so we've heard of spirits, we've heard of angels and demons and things, but a lot of people don't realize that in almost all magical paradigms I've ever come across, it's possible to create spirits. Now, what is a spirit? Okay, well, spirit's a difficult term for someone who's like a rationalist, reductionist type. So
Sure.
let's start with memes.
Yeah.
So ironically, one of the best descriptions of spirits I've ever come across for people who don't want to get into woo comes directly from Richard Dawkins. And in The Selfish Gene, he talks about meme theory, MEME, and everyone knows the memes that are the jokes on the internet with little pictures and captions.
Sure.
But it actually means any unit, any idea that wants to reproduce itself, any reproducible idea that jumps from head to head.
I've also heard it defined as the smallest possible unit of culture.
Yeah, well, you could look at it that way because culture is generally, I mean, that's how he was trying to explain it.
One of his students wrote a book. I think it was called The Selfish Meme, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe that's just how I remember it. But yeah, and she goes into the way that memes can cooperate under exactly the same incentives that genes do, and that's what causes these memeplexes, or maybe you could call them egregores or spirits, these kind of collective, non-existent but existent.
So he says he even gets into the fact that some people reproduce not bodily but through their ideas.
Yeah.
Which I can't prove, but I think that's true. I think a lot of creativity actually piggybacks on reproductive drive. I think some people actually devote their life to reproducing through their ideas and their music and their art and car designing or whatever it is they're into, rather than
if you're willing to say that your ideas are part of yourself, and I don't know how you couldn't accept that, then that immediately leads to the question, mathematically speaking, does the world that we live in make it more, or does it incentivize us to spend our energy on reproducing the genetic side of ourselves or the ideational side of ourselves?
Well, ever more the latter, especially in our current age.
I think so too.
Very few people are having children compared with our ancestors.
But all of us are creators now.
I mean, we rambled a bit here, but hopefully people understanding what a meme is.
Our audience is small but sophisticated, so we don't need to spoon feed them. Yeah.
So, a spirit is a meme that operates in the world as if it has a willpower. Cool. Now, this might annoy some people because, like, spirits have an existence beyond human beings as well. Memes can have a existence beyond human beings potentially.
Well, anyone who's read a page of a book should know that.
Spirit definitely has a willpower, and you're saying it might appear to one. It's like, well, we can't prove the willpower either way. So, I'd say it's just looking at the same object from a different angle. I'd say that memes that appear to operate in the world as if they have will are the same thing as entities that operate in the world as if they have will. And I think this can help us, if this can be accepted by people, I think this can slowly start to knit our world together with that of the past and that of spiritual cultures. And the fact that actually, like, I'm sorry, but most of us have one or two spirit experiences in our lifetime, if we're really honest about it. And it's just we don't always reconcile them with the rest of what we believe in the rest of the time. So
Okay.
it's not as if we're not a spiritual culture.
So if we accept the existence of some variety of non-material or semi-material creature, whether we call it spirits, meme plexes, or
Okay, let's
egregores.
give it another name again.
Okay, great.
Idea constructs.
Okay, yep.
Yeah. I can't see the difference. I think the world of ideas is the spirit realm. I think the world of ideas is the spirituality. And I think idea constructs and spirits are indistinguishable.
In the sense that we have an internal world, and as far as I can tell, all of the things we've been talking about operate in that place. I completely agree with you.
What's more, and this might scuff some people, but I don't think there's a way to argue it. If you look at all the mysticisms, at least all the mysticisms I've ever read, I think we got off track. I think when they're talking about spirits, angels, demons, and everything, they're always talking about these idea constructs. And this idea that's, I don't think there's ever been mind, spirit, and body. I think mind and spirit are the same thing. And somehow post Descartes, we got kind of screwed up about this.
Well, spirit is such a slippery word because it's used in so many different ways, and also it's used so ambiguously. I think it's really difficult for us to focus on it particularly.
If you don't like the word spirit, and you want to understand what I'm saying, just use the word mind. And if you don't like the word spirits, use idea constructs, because to me, while they are like looking at the same object from different angles, I think they're still looking at the same object. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Now, in every paradigm I have ever come across that believes in spirits, it talks about them as real things. They talk about spirits that pre-exist human beings, but they also talk about spirits being created by human beings. Things like golems, things like meme constructs,
homunculi,
corporations, homunculi, all of these, egregores, all of them seem to accept that you can create spirits. And the reason that these things are beyond human beings is, and are different to just like you just imagining a character, is when they start jumping from head to head and they start being agreed upon by their attributes. So, Santa Claus is a spirit and an idea construct.
Right.
Because we can agree upon when someone is enacting Santa Claus correctly or not. We know when we're meeting Santa Claus and we know when we're not. We know the rules around which a Santa Claus is Santa Claus, and we know if you subvert those rules, it's not real Santa.
What do you make of the suggestion that Santa Claus is an entity that uses us to get his work done?
Exactly. He millions and millions and millions of dollars are shifted around in our deal with the Santa Claus spirit, whereby we depict him on pieces of chocolate and crap, and we sell them to people at Christmas. With the and what Santa Claus gets out of it is that he gets to reproduce over and over and over and over again. And what Santa Claus is a construct caused by threads of previous constructs. He's Saint Nicholas, so there's another meme construct.
All right.
He's also remnants of Father Christmas was originally a different thing to Santa Claus.
Sure.
If you go back about 150 years ago.
They still are in cultures that are non-English speaking. I mean, you compare Krampus to the Russian version of Mr. Christmas, whatever his name is. You know,
Des Moritz or something. Yeah, and then there's Der Weihnachtsmann, which is the Christmas man in Germany, which Germans insist is a different character to Nicholas.
He's not Saint Nicholas in there.
And you go, well, and it's not even the one who brings the Christmas presents. That's Der Christkind, the Christ child. So yes, you're right. We're not all in agreement.
Yeah.
And then
Okay,
there's an element of Santa Claus. Sorry, there's an element of Father Christmas who became Santa Claus. That's a remnant of some of the aspects of Odin.
sure.
And then there's an element of him that is a cross pollination between Sami religious belief about mushroom shamans and who interact with reindeer. There's a particular reindeer shaman who flies through the air and jumps down during Christmas time, jumps down chimneys and uses magic to heal people. That seems to have cross-pollinated with the fact that they were living next to Norwegians and Swedish people and who worshipped Odin, and they were using Amanita muscaria mushroom, which the shamans of which dress up in red and white costumes when they're eating the red and white mushroom, or they're drinking reindeer piss because reindeers can eat this mushroom without poisoning themselves, and the piss will still be an entheogen for a human being drinking it. So you start to get these things. So like Santa Claus is one of this crazy pastiche of many, many things. But there's a real sense in which it's an idea that wants to be reproduced. It's an idea so complex that it has a personality that we can enact. And little children everywhere know when someone is doing the Santa Claus role properly or he's not.
And they
when
love to enforce the rules about it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when someone is doing it right, they go along with the game, and when someone's not, they go, "That's not Santa,"
Yeah.
right?
All
Okay,
right.
so Santa's a spirit in that sense.
Let me ask you a more provocative question.
Good.
Is God one of these?
Yeah. Okay. So God, if you said spirit is a difficult term because it's got lots of meanings,
Yeah.
and I think this is a problem in English especially. But God's even worse because, in the larger sense, God just means spirits, like particular spirits. It's a particular type of spirit as a God.
Like a category.
Okay, so sometimes you get like the Richard Dawkins style atheist getting in front of people and saying, it's like, in a sense, everyone's an atheist because you don't believe in Thor, and I just don't believe. I've just added Jesus to the things I don't believe, and you're an atheist about Norse gods, and I'm an atheist about Christian gods, and we're all atheists. I'm just one step more atheist than everyone else.
An old canard, but anyway.
Okay. Yeah, he's completely misunderstanding it. So, even in the Bible, there are spirits termed gods that are angels and things.
Well, God's very specific that you're not allowed to worship any of the other gods, just him.
Originally, they don't believe in one God at all. They're monolatrous. They're not, which means they accept that there are many gods and even acknowledge the existence of other gods, but they say no, only follow one, and that's why Yahweh says he's a jealous God. He's cool. So what's going on here? And there's also monotheism and polytheism are not irreconcilable things at all. So this feel about monotheism being different to polytheism. Catholicism is polytheistic, and so is Orthodox Christianity, and so it's any Christianity that has angels in it or other higher powers or demons or devils, because all of those things have been called gods at different times. What's more, people get fed up. They say, I don't believe in God, or God is about belief, and we get screwed up between that which we feel, the ideas we like in our head that we feel should be true, and that which we really behave in the world as if it's true, and that which we can all experience. So there is, going back to the monad, which I think is the most abstract conception of what God is, which is that God is, again, the eternal void of possibility from which everything emanates. This God, I believe, is just a place you can go in your perception that you can undeniably experience, and it requires no faith whatsoever, and it requires no belief. I think that's the most abstract form of God, down to like Thor, which is Thor is the god of thunderstorms and temper tantrums. Okay, so he's the red-headed god because people's faces turn red when they're really, really enraged. When a toddler, if you're anyone who's a parent, when your toddler turns bright red, um, if you're in Old Norse culture, I think they could have readily said, "Oh, he's being a little Thor right now." Okay, and it's
Also,
totally
redheads have iron exiting their body all of the time, so they tend to suffer from iron deficiency and therefore
I don't
mood
know
swings. That's why they have that reputation.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah,
Didn't know that. And apparently they feel pain worse than other people too.
spiritually, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that kind of God is an aspect, is a character analysis of a way human beings can behave, as well as an aspect of nature to which we have metaphorically linked it, as in a storm feels angry and people can get angry. And Thor is a god that Loki makes fun of all the time because he gets angry and then Loki can manipulate him into doing things. Because basically they're playing games of chicken all the time. Like, I bet you're too chicken to do that. It's like, I am not a chicken. And then you can get the red-headed god to do shit for you. Okay, so that's a god too. See how that's got almost nothing to do with the universal godhead monad type god?
Well, I think that this is... Look, I completely agree with you. I think that our conversation about gods in the West is so tremendously screwed up. Well, I think that it is, I think it is tremendously screwed up. And I think that it's tremendously screwed up for a whole raft of different reasons. One of them being that the word God is either not defined at all or has so many definitions that it's impossible to pin down what anybody means about it a lot of the time
we need
anyway.
Sub-definitions for all of this stuff.
And also, I think that there's a historical factor, which I think that the Anglospheric West has had a religion that is monotheistic in the
But it hasn't. That's what I'm trying to get to. It's not.
well, in the sense that the Anglospheric West is not Catholic but Protestant. It rejected the Trinity and became more Unitarian in that sense.
All of this, I think, is confusion piled on confusion.
I agree.
Protestants still believe in angels in many cases. They still believe they definitely believe in devils in many cases.
Well, be that as it may, the point that I'm trying to make is that the fact that we've had a inheritance of monotheism, or at least something like it, has meant that the conversation that we're trying to have in the 21st century is so shaped by it that it has come down to this binary of, do you think this one particular guy exists or not?
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the historical error that is going on. Whereas my analysis is that gods are just anything that is external to ourselves that has an influence on our life. That's the most abstract form of what a god definition could possibly be. Yeah.
I can see why you're going there. I think that's a brave effort.
Do you think there's any chance of getting any juice out of it, or is it a doomed endeavor?
See what you like. Go away thinking about what this idea of thought constructs that behave in the world as if they have will. And I guess gods are the old. Gods in the polytheistic sense are the ones that are one, ancient, and two, have been enacting on people's will over and over. And what do I mean by that is that we enact them. They're like archetypes, and we enact them like God is, like Thor's temper tantrums.
So I accept your definition of gods, but I think that it's not complete.
No.
Have you read Jung's essay on Wotan?
Oh, maybe. No, I'm not sure if I've come across it or not. I've read quite a lot of Jung, but...
Well, anyway, the point is that when I read that, it made me aware of the fact that gods can also exist as things that are not thought constructs, in the sense that if there's a predictable return of something, like, for example, war to Europe, which is the analysis that Jung does in his discussion on Wotan, then the fact that war reliably returns, independent of the fact that we can have egregores that operate inside our minds, there can also be an external material factor that is that can have influences on our minds, but is not caused by them, because what causes it is the geopolitical layout of Europe.
Yeah, what you're saying is what I'm trying to explain.
Perfect.
Yeah, yeah. You're doing it a little better than me in that case. Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I appreciate that we're converging on something.
No, it's cool. Like, okay, before psychology, we weren't all swimming around like not thinking about thinking. That's ridiculous. As long as we've been able to think, we've been thinking about thinking. In the past, people talked about it through mythology in many cases. It's one of the ways people talk about thinking.
Very likely the first time anyone realized that they were thinking, that they were thinking about thinking, is what caused them to realize that they were thinking.
Exactly. So I mean, you can probably tell I really enjoy the Norse archetypes, the Norse gods, for one thing, because they're easy to explain.
Wow. I would definitely not have said that.
I'd say I compared with some other paradigms, but easier. Okay, so like another one I really like. Sorry.
I agree that there are easy explanations that can be applied to some of the Norse gods, but
easier to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm completely willing to use them as the sample archetype if we want to have a deep discussion, because I'm fairly familiar with them. But also, like, for example, let me take a suggestion. And I've no idea if this is historically true or not, but we can interpret Thor as the working class god and Odin as the royal god. And the reason why we do that is because Thor is a practical man. He likes to drink. He gets work done. He uses a tool. Whereas Odin and here I return to the esoteric split in the sense that one is for people who are outside the temple, but for people who are royalty or aristocratic, they need a different god, someone who is dark, someone who acknowledges the existence of war, someone that's not comprehensible, someone that invented language and magic, someone who suffered, and that becomes an internal mystery cult, internal to the social milieu there. Now, again, I'm not saying that's historically accurate. I'm just saying that as a way of thinking about the way that divinities can operate, it sets out some of the useful concepts.
Okay, I agree with your sentiment, but not all the terms, but that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
So I more or less agree with you. A good comparison is Odin. Odin's, it's hard to tell, but Odin appears to have become, and I could be going out on a limb here, but appears to have become the head god of Norse mythology maybe about 200 AD or something.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And it's not completely understood, because you got to understand that almost the entirety of what we know about Norse mythology comes from the Icelandic Eddas that were written about 1100 AD-ish by Christians.
Snorri Sturluson.
Yeah, Snorri Sturluson. And he does strange things. Like there's a god, Odin, which, or Odin is his proper name, Odin. Oth being a part of a word which means crazed, and in being the definite article, it means the crazed one, or the crazy one. There's another god in the list that Snorri Sturluson says is a different god, called Other, which just means crazed, without the definite article on it. So he's already starting to like get a bit odd. Odin, which is Odin, is married to Frigg, who's a fertility goddess in the agricultural sense, and she's part of the Aesir, who are the gods of Scandinavia. And then there's another
one of the two branches of gods.
Yeah, the other branches are the Vanir, and the Vanir seem to have come in from outside. And amongst the Vanir, there is Freyja, often pronounced Freya, but Freyja. Freyja is married to Other, and Frigg is married to Odin. So then there's this married couple that have almost identical names, and Snorri Sturluson said they are different gods, and it's very likely that they were just the same thing.
Well, remember in the saga,
different areas,
Remember in the saga that Snorri says the war between the gods was settled by the swapping of their leaders. So actually, the head of the Aesir is actually what did you call him, a Vanir? And
Vanir.
and the head of the Vanir is actually an Aesir.
Well, it gets even more complicated. This is where I wanted to go, because you were talking about class. So I almost agree with you, but Thor is a difficult example, but I'm going to try and strengthen your point with a better example, I hope.
I appreciate that.
Thor is the son of Odin, or Odin. But there's two gods of war, and the two gods of war for different reasons. One is Tyr, the one-handed god, and there's Odin, the one-eyed god. Now, Tyr, a lot of his mythologists think that Tyr was probably head of the gods going further back in time, that Odin comes in as an outsider god from another culture or brought in, because Odin is not the type of god you would normally pick if you wanted a stable society. He's not Father Christmas. He's more like the Godfather.
Well, his name's Happy in War, so
yeah, and the crazed one. So cool. Okay, so Tyr is the god you would choose if you had a warlike society based on good sportsmanship, because he's a sword god who goes out and fights on the front line, and he's about strength and valor, and he's basically a good Boy Scout, a good soldier. He's a front god of one side, and like if he's got a beef, he goes and does his beef at his own risk and his own responsibility. So Tyr's the good-natured one, but at some point in history, and I think this coincides with difficult events for Scandinavians, they chose Odin instead. Odin is the only male god that practices Seidr. This is the female witch magic that was forbidden, that was considered effeminate, because good Viking men, good Old Norse men, should always settle their disputes with valor and honor and responsibility, and never by underhanded means. And this is why they were a dueling society, for instance.
Sure, but we must
underhanded.
Accept surely that the Scandinavian cultures had an extreme respect for underhanded and malicious tactics.
Because of Odin, because they chose Odin as their god, and Odin is completely underhanded.
And also vice versa.
If you've ever watched the best depiction of Odin I've ever come across in popular culture is from the Godfather movie. The Godfather. That character turns into Odin. He starts with an inkling of honor and honesty, and by the end of the film, he's just the leader who will fuck over anyone in order to keep his family safe and to get what he wants.
What's interesting though is, if we accept that when Odin sits on his throne, he's all-seeing, but not all-knowing through time, because his prediction of the occurrence of the Ragnarok is predicated on a near certainty, but not an absolute certainty. So if we isolate his actions and think about them in terms of everything being predicated on whether or not it strengthens, how it shifts the odds of the final battle, then he becomes a geopolitical actor.
It gets complicated because they have an unusual sense of time with a concept, which in Old English got called weird. I think in Old Norse it's fata, which comes from fate, the same kind of word as fate. I believe so. Anyway, they're the same concept. And we're going to have a difficult time explaining that, because they didn't consider time the way we consider it, and they didn't consider the foretelling of events the way we consider it now.
Yeah.
They did not have linear time, and they considered people to be on a path that you can't exactly get off, though you can get onto a parallel path, but there's this way as a human being in which you're being drawn towards particular duties in many cases, and that even the gods have to follow that. And this was also the same in Greek culture, where you've got the fates and these kind of characters. So I feel like there could possibly be a whole discussion about that, but just not to get off track. So you've got two leaders. You've got Tyr, which is the orderly leader of good battles, and then you've got Odin, who's the underhanded one, who is a trickster. So Odin does things like he's trying to procure dead soldiers' souls to fight a battle for him in Ragnarok, right?
Yeah,
But he'll frequent
what are they called?
they get sent to Valhalla and they wait there and drink and eat
Yeah,
until
and
they
spend all day
fight.
fighting, so they get good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you make deals with Odin, hoping that he won't screw you over. But frequently in the sagas, there's a few times where he like um, honors to have people win battles as long as they do battle a certain way, and then has as many of the soldiers killed as possible, just so that he can procure more souls for
Well,
Valhalla.
Snorri tells us that the whole purpose of sending the goddesses to Earth is to stir up wars in order to maximize the number of casualties, so that he can staff his army for when Ragnarok comes. Yeah.
So two other really important points. Why the Vikings probably did this, and two, Odin is a chaos god that works, and then they have another, but he's a blood brother with a chaos god who creates strife. So the first one is, we're talking about a time in history when Scandinavia was at the Viking Age, when Odinism reached a peak.
Yeah, the migration era.
Yeah, migration starting 750 AD odd with the ransacking of Lindisfarne.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah.
In England. So why they did that, why they all went a raiding, which is what the word Viking means. It means to go raiding. A Vik is a bay area. So they're the men who hang around the bay, which means they're the boatmen.
That must be every Norwegian, surely.
Yeah, well, originally. Is that you ended up with a culture where you had a bunch of rich men who owned land, who were kind of chieftains and jarls and things. The farmland was quite difficult to my understanding in Scandinavia at the time, especially in places like Iceland and stuff.
Well, the soil in Iceland is rubbish, so that's that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do? And the rich men were picking up extra wives or mistresses or things, because if you're a woman, you want to be looked after.
Sure.
I'm not trying to be sexist here. This is the age in which women had to have 7 to 9 births in a lifetime just to keep population stable. Tribal and early feudalistic ages were kind of brutal. Our ancestors didn't have much choice. So if you got everyone who could have children had to have children, and you wanted your children looked after. So this is why we ended up things like polygamy. So you've got all these young men who have no resources. They got no chance to buy land, and the only recourse for them is to become sneaky thuggish raiders, take a high risk, maybe die, maybe come back with a lot of riches. They come back and then they can afford some land and afford to have a wife and have a family.
What do you make of
that's when you choose Odin as your god.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Let me add a layer to that and see what you think about this.
Cool.
What do you make of the suggestion that the Viking raiding parties were easily conceived of and adapted to by these extra Scandinavian men because they inherited the Yamnaya Manabund technology, where you would have this kind of, these guys, like, that was already what was going on. And
so I'm not familiar with Yamnaya technology.
The Yamnaya were the people that moved into Europe from the kind of Ukraine region early on and pushed in. Yeah, okay, and pair that with the suggestion that the Viking boat culture is likely, or potentially anyway, could be an adaptation from the Yamnaya's chariot and horse culture. So there's like a thrust of cultural push out of Ukraine through Germany into Scandinavia, where the technologies the intellectual technologies and cultural technologies shift their form as they hit the ocean, but are essentially just a reinstitution of the old way of doing things again.
As a paradigm shift, yeah, I think that makes sense. As a
Yeah.
specific about whether that culture did it or not, I don't know.
I
But also,
don't have the expertise to judge the historicity of it.
but also as the mythology, I mean, they did talk about the Vanir, this other set of gods coming in and having a battle with the Aesir, the Scandinavian gods, and them reconciling, and they came in from another place. And then there's also some speculation whether Odin, even earlier, came in as an Eastern god somehow, and replaced Tyr as the Lord of Gods.
Well,
And this is why they came up with that story about Tyr holding his hand into the fire and Odin
yeah.
outsmarting him.
Assuming that he's etymologically related to all of the other varieties of European skyfather gods that come out of the Yamnaya thrust into Europe, then
Odin's the
I'd
weird
think so.
one. Tyr seems to be the one that might be etymologically related to things like Deus and yeah,
The whole Proto-Indo-European thing. Again, I don't have the expertise to judge on that.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But so here's the question. Like, all of that is fascinating, but for our scientific listeners who are not interested in, the ins and outs of particular ancient mythologies, what lessons can we draw? What lessons can we draw?
I was getting there, and you've asked
Yep.
many questions, and we've been pulled away. But we haven't. Oh, I'm still bringing it back because that
Yep.
was my point one
Okay.
of why. Okay. Point two will hopefully help people understand what gods at this level means. So you've got Odin. I already talked about how Odin. My favorite depiction of Odin, the character I think is most similar to I've seen in movies, is from the Godfather films. The Godfather. Right. If you ever watch the TV series or read the books American Gods, Neil Gaiman did a good job of adapting Odin's character and getting that sneaky kind of Godfather type aspect to him right too.
Sure.
Where's not like the Avenger movies where yeah. Anyway, but I think this is a beautiful thing because these are characters you come across in real life and you go, well, there's an Odin. Or there's a cool and crime boss type characters. But there's another one. Odin has a blood brother who's Loki. They are both chaos gods. They're both sneaky, underhanded gods, and they both use forbidden magic, and they both gender bend when they do so. So they're characters, they're rebellious gods that break taboos, because Odin learns from Freya, lots of people pronounce Freya, learns the female magic, Seidr. Women are tolerated to use a kind of magic that's based on charms and curses that good Viking men are not supposed to use. They're supposed to be honorable and stand up for themselves. But Odin uses this effeminate magic because he's underhanded. And therefore sometimes they made fun of him for doing so.
Is that the same branch of magic that he invented when he was hanging on the tree?
No, that's extra. That's runes. So Odin got associated with Hermes.
Yeah.
In Greco-Roman culture because Hermes is the god of communication, and so is Odin through runes.
Yeah.
And it's an association with Thoth and Egyptian.
I was going to say, yeah.
It's usually a character who creates the first magical symbols.
What do you make of that association? Is that pure historical revisionism? Or do you think there's an actual connection between them? Or are they a reflection of an archetype that we can't...
Reflection of an archetype is my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So, right. So Loki. Loki is my favorite character to discuss in there. And this is how it could be applicable to people you know, because I have come across a lot more Lokis than I have come across Odins in our culture, because we're living in a very lawful culture. So if we were living in kind of maybe like Colombian cocaine kind of organized crime, would meet a few more Odins.
Sure.
But I do meet Lokis now and then. So nobody knows how old Loki is. he hangs out with Thor, who's Odin's son, and yet he's at least as old as Odin. He comes from outside. He's half giant, but we're not quite sure of his origins. And he's surrounded in this mystery. Odin and him are blood brothers, and therefore Odin cannot harm him. And everywhere that Odin drinks, Loki has to be allowed to drink, even though frequently he pisses the rest of the gods off so much that they want to get rid of him. And Odin says, "Sorry, man, I did a blood thing. I did the blood brother thing with him, and we can't get rid of him." And he's always trying to manipulate people. Like he's usually in humor. He's okay. So have you ever met someone who's mischievous, has a weird kind of charm, hangs out with people much younger than them, and as you get to know them, like if you're one of these people who's aware of these people, you might either go, "This is such a charming guy, I'm going to hang out with him and talk to him," or you might go, "Something's off about this guy," and there's all these sort of he's having sex with all these really young women who are all troubled, and and nobody knows how old they are. This is a Loki. Charles Manson is a Loki, and from my understanding of, if gods can be personality types, I think a lot of mythology is talking about ways people actually enact themselves and orientate themselves in the world.
I'm extremely skeptical of the idea of using pantheons just purely as personality analysis devices. But of course we're human beings, so everything we do is human. So when we're involved in mythologizing, it's a human endeavor.
Sure. Here's why I like it. It's because until I learned who Loki was, I wasn't aware of these people. And after I learned what kind of character Loki is, who's my favorite villain and written in all of literature, I think it's an unbelievably... They touched on something that is villainous that I'd never see anything so perfectly, succinctly explained anywhere else.
And as soon as the pattern was revealed to you, you were able to match it onto a whole bunch of mysteries.
A few people I've met in my life, and people throughout history, and I go, "Oh," and you're able to spot them quick and early, and then make a decision about giving them a wide berth, or they tend to be these kind of culty people. This kind of makes sense. I get like it. Whilst I understand your concerns, I do think that part of what a pantheon is explaining archetypical characters that you might meet in the world. And you could say that you could say as a literary character, Charles Manson had similar aspects as Loki.
Sure.
Or you could say, if you were a spiritualist, you could say, no, he was invoking the Loki archetype, if you're willing to go on that limb with me. Which I mean, it's this way that these spirits can emanate as behavior patterns in people.
Well, let me go even further out on a limb and say that one aspect of Loki is the collective actions of all of the people who bear the Loki archetype in the world as just a part of Loki's aura, and that is the way that he affects the world, or one way that he affects the world, even if it's never intentional.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to explain, yes.
Excellent.
Cool. So, to go back to the sort of beginning of what my mission is with my book, to help people reconcile how do we think now to the way people thought in the past. And if you're willing to go on the limb with this, especially with this, because the Loki thing is not something I put in my book. It's just a personal thing I find interesting that I'm working with until I get further evidence.
Correct.
But it's the type of thing where you start to realize when you are able to use these in the world, you go, actually, some of these people weren't very dumb after all. They were explaining some fairly deep psychological concepts, and as well as concepts in nature, as well as things that happen in the world. And once you realize the utility of them, you realize that they're quite onto it. I think Loki is as good a description of a way a personality can operate in the world as many of the things in the DSM-5 statistical manual of mental disorders. I think it's
Yeah.
as sophisticated as talking about narcissistic personality disorder.
Well, any person who thinks that our ancestors were not as sophisticated as us, all they need to do is just go and read the tiniest amount, 5 pages of the pre-Socratic philosophers, and you will immediately have that illusion ripped away from you. I think the strength of
don't
your...
have to go along with my Loki idea, but at least use it as a fringe to try and reconcile these things with the world that we live in. So I think in the gist of what I'm saying is useful.
I agree, and I think the strength of your Loki idea is that it's that it works as a stepping stone. It's modern enough that we can feel it and see it, and it's an excellent stepping stone for stepping back further into history in order to open up and make available to us ideas that previously wouldn't be accessible if we didn't have Loki as a stepping stone, because it articulates a whole set of really useful concepts for us.
Cool.
Yeah.
So hopefully people can see some sort of thread of what I mean by pragmatic thinking, pragmatic magical thinking, even though we've gone off sort of all sorts of tangents. But hopefully we've been orbiting around this kind of central thing, that it's got to be useful to you. I'm only interested in magic that works or it has a use, and now it enables us to make change in the world. I'm not interested in magic that only functions if we believe in it. I think the most interesting magic happens works whether we believe in it or not. And it's the stuff that's going to be most useful to skeptics. I consider, even though I might sound like quite out there to some of these people, I do consider myself a skeptic. I try and be open to ideas, but I do test them in the world. And I'm not interested in stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that to wrap this all up in a nice little bundle, would it be fair to say that we should take our minds and our internal world seriously?
Well, what happens when you don't? I mean, one tends to head towards either some sort of anxiety or a mental breakdown even. Of course, we have to. It's part of our survival. We have an emotional center for a reason. We have an emotional world for a reason. And it's vital to our reproduction that we can, be it through ideas or be it through bodily having children, that you can relate to other people emotionally. So, of course.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Cool.
How are you feeling energy-wise? Should we wrap it up there?
I'm fine. I think if I was a listener, I'd possibly be reaching the end of my energy by
now. Well, I'll tell you what. This has been a fantastic discussion. Let's wrap it up here and let's schedule another one because I'm certain there's heaps more that we can talk about.